She wore her wedding dress for 11 hours. He never came. It took 11 years to answer for what he did. Watch till the end.
The ballroom of the Choi Grand Hotel glittered under 1,000 crystal lights. Round tables dressed in white linen stretched across the marble floor, each one crowned with orchids flown in from Jeju. Somewhere near the entrance, a string quartet tuned their instruments, waiting for a signal that would never come. Seo-yeon stood behind the velvet curtain, her hands pressed flat against her stomach, to keep them from trembling. The dress her mother had chosen clung to her like something borrowed from a dream, ivory silk with a train that took 2 women to arrange. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time and allowed herself a small, private smile. 6 years of dating. 2 years of engagement. Tonight was supposed to be the easy part. "You look beautiful," her mother whispered, adjusting a pin in her hair. "Ji-ho is a lucky man." Seo-yeon laughed softly. "I keep telling him that." Outside, the guests were already seated. Business partners, family friends, half of Seoul's elite dressed in their finest, waiting to watch the son of the Baek family marry the woman he'd loved since university. It was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be certain. An hour passed, then 2. The wedding planner kept checking her earpiece, her smile growing thinner each time she reappeared behind the curtain. "He's just running late," she said. "Traffic, maybe." Seo-yeon nodded, though something cold had already begun to settle in her chest. By the 3rd hour, whispers had started moving through the ballroom like a slow current. Guests leaned toward each other. Phones came out. Someone near the back laughed, quickly muffled by a hand. At the 4th hour, Seo-yeon's father walked to the podium meant for vows and picked up the microphone instead, his voice shaking as he asked everyone to please be patient, that these things happen, that the ceremony would begin shortly. It never did. At 9:30, a single photograph appeared on someone's phone, then another. Then it seemed every phone in the room had the same image glowing on its screen. Ji-ho, in a hotel suite across the city, laughing with his arm around another woman. The caption underneath, posted from his own sister's account before it was hastily deleted, read, "The real celebration tonight." Seo-yeon read it once, standing perfectly still behind the curtain, while her mother read it beside her, and made a small, wounded sound. She did not cry. Not then. She walked out from behind the curtain in her wedding dress, in front of 300 people who had already seen the photograph, and she said only one sentence before she left the hall. "Please, enjoy the food. It would be a shame to waste it." Then she walked out through the front doors of the Choi Grand Hotel and did not look back. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Seo-yeon of the Han textile family, left at the altar by Baek Ji-ho, heir to Baek Construction, for a woman nobody in their circle had ever heard of. The comments were cruel in the way only strangers can be cruel, picking apart her photographs, her family, her worth, as though humiliation were a performance and they had front-row seats. Her father tried to shield her from it. Her mother cried more than she did. And Seo-yeon sat in her childhood bedroom, still in yesterday's makeup, staring at a ceiling she hadn't looked at properly in years, and made herself a single promise. She would never again let anyone make her small. 11 years later, the city of Seoul knew a different name. Han Seo-yeon, founder and CEO of Seo-yeon Holdings, a name that had gone from a modest fashion import company to one of the fastest-growing investment groups in the country. She wore tailored suits instead of borrowed dresses now, and when she walked into a room, people stood a little straighter. She had built it from nothing but stubbornness, and the kind of fury that doesn't fade. It just learns to be useful. And in the last year, Seo-yeon Holdings had quietly acquired debt from 3 companies that once refused to do business with a jilted bride. One of them was Baek Construction. Nobody in her office knew the history yet, only that their CEO had personally requested every file on the company and that she read them late into the night with a coffee going cold beside her. Her assistant, Yuna, knocked twice before entering. "Ma'am, the Baek construction meeting is confirmed for Thursday. They're sending their operations director." Seo-yeon didn't look up from the file. Not the son? No. Apparently he's been overseas. Something in her chest loosened, just slightly. She wasn't ready to see him yet, though she told herself daily that she was long past caring. Good, she said. Let's keep it that way for now. Across the city, in an apartment far smaller than the Baek family estate, a 17-year-old boy sat at his desk staring at a blank college application. His name was Do-yeon, and he had his father's sharp jaw and his mother's stubborn silence, though he'd never met the woman who gave him the second trait. His father, Baek Ji-ho, knocked on the doorframe. Still not finished? I don't know what to write. Ji-ho leaned against the frame, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Write the truth. That usually works. Do-yeon looked up at him. You always say that, but you never explain what happened with you and grandmother. Why she doesn't visit anymore. Ji-ho's jaw tightened. That's a long story. You always say that too. His father didn't answer. He turned the hallway light off on his way out, leaving Do-yeon alone with a blinking cursor and a question he'd been asking his whole life without ever getting close to an answer. Later that night, Ji-ho sat in his study with a photograph he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, one nobody in the house knew about. Seo-yeon, at 24, laughing at something off camera, her hair loose the way she used to wear it before everything went wrong. He didn't take it out often. Tonight he wasn't sure why he had. His wife had left 3 years ago, tired of a marriage that had never quite managed to become one. She'd taken very little with her and said even less. Do-yeon stayed with him, more out of habit than any custody agreement, and the two of them had built a quiet, careful life around each other's silences. Ji-ho placed the photograph back in the drawer and closed it slowly, the way a person closes a door they aren't ready to walk through yet. A few days later, the Baek construction offices buzzed with a different kind of tension. The company was short on capital for its riverside development, and Seo-yeon Holdings had made it clear they were the only investor willing to move quickly. The operations director briefed the board that morning, his voice careful. Ms. Han's terms are generous, he said, but she wants final sign-off in person. With the CEO, a murmur went around the table. Ji-ho, seated at the head, frowned. Which CEO? Ours or theirs? Both, sir. Thursday, 3 o'clock, her office. Ji-ho nodded slowly, already thinking about the dozen other fires he needed to put out that week, unaware that the name on the contract, Han So-yeon, belonged to anyone other than a stranger with excellent instincts for undervalued companies. Thursday arrived gray and rain-soaked, the kind of Seoul afternoon that made every glass building look like it was weeping. Ji-ho took the elevator up to the top floor of the Seo-yeon Holdings tower, straightening his tie, reviewing numbers in his head, entirely unprepared for what waited for him on the other side of the door. Seo-yeon stood by the window when he walked in, her back to the door, watching the rain slide down the glass. She had heard his footsteps stop the moment he crossed the threshold. She had known, from the file with his name on it, that this day was coming. She had rehearsed this moment more times than she'd ever admit. Ms. Han, his assistant said behind him, this is Baek Ji-ho, CEO of... I know who he is, Seo-yeon said, and turned around. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Rain kept falling outside the window. Somewhere far below, the city moved on the way it always did, indifferent to the two people standing frozen in a glass office, 11 years and one wedding dress apart. Ji-ho's voice came out rough, like he hadn't used it properly in years. Seo-yeon. She held his gaze, steady, though her heart was doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. It's Ms. Han now, she said quietly. Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss. He didn't move at first. He simply looked at her, at the woman who had once worn his ring, now standing in a corner office with his company's future in her hands, and understood, all at once, that whatever he thought he owed the past, it had just walked back into his life, wearing a much better suit than his. Right, he finally said, lowering himself into the chair across from her desk. Business. But neither of them believed, even for a second, that this was only business. Rain kept tapping against the window as Jiho sat across from her, a folder of numbers between them that neither of them was looking at. He had rehearsed a dozen versions of this meeting on the drive over, all of them professional, all of them forgettable. None of them had prepared him for the sound of her voice again, low and steady, sitting in a chair that used to be his to pull out for her. Your Riverside project is short by 14 billion won, Seo-yeon said, sliding a single page across the desk. My offer covers it in full, at a rate lower than any bank would give you right now. Jiho looked at the number, then at her. That's generous. It's smart business, she said. Baek Construction's stock is undervalued. I don't do favors, Mr. Baek. I do good investments. He almost smiled at the way she said his surname, like it belonged to a stranger. Right, of course. She waited, watching him not read the page in front of him. You haven't looked at the terms. I'm looking at you. The words left him before he could stop them, and for a moment the office felt smaller than it was, the rain louder, the 6 years shorter. Seo-yeon's pen stopped moving. Mr. Baek, she said carefully, if this is going to be a problem for you, I can have my director finish the negotiation. It's not a problem. He straightened in his chair, embarrassed at himself. Forgive me. It's just strange, seeing you like this. Like what? In charge of something bigger than both of us used to dream about. Something flickered across her face, gone before he could name it. People change when they're forced to, she said. Shall we go over the terms, or would you like more time to compose yourself? He almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so exactly like her, sharp and unbothered on the surface, giving nothing away. He'd forgotten how much he used to enjoy losing arguments to her. Terms, he said, please. They spent the next 40 minutes speaking only of numbers, repayment schedules, equity stakes, and by the end of it, Jiho had signed nothing, but understood everything would be signed by Friday. Seo-yeon walked him to the door herself, her heels quiet against the marble. At the threshold, he paused. Seo-yeon. Ms. Han, she corrected, though her voice had softened just slightly around the edges. Ms. Han, he said. Thank you. For the deal, and for not throwing me out of the building. Don't thank me yet, she said. You still owe me 14 billion won. It wasn't quite a joke, but it wasn't quite cold either, and Jiho carried the sound of it with him all the way down in the elevator, turning it over like something he wasn't ready to put down. That evening, Seo-yeon sat in her penthouse with her shoes finally off, a glass of wine untouched on the side table, replaying the meeting in her head against her own permission. She told herself it meant nothing. That 11 years and a boardroom was more than enough distance, but her hands had trembled once during the meeting, right when he said, I'm looking at you, and she had hidden it by picking up her pen. Her daughter's laughter drifted in from the next room, breaking the thought apart. Seo-yeon followed the sound and found her sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, sketchbook open, humming something off-key while she drew. You're still up, Seo-yeon said, leaning against the doorframe. I couldn't sleep. Her daughter, 11 years old with her mother's sharp eyes and a stubborn curl she refused to let anyone tame, held up her drawing. Look, I finished it. It was a building, tall and glass, not unlike the one Seo-yeon worked in every day. That's beautiful, Sun-hee. Are you going to be an architect now instead of a singer? Sun-hee shrugged with the confidence only a child could manage. I can be both. Oh, Seo-yeon smiled and sat beside her on the floor, forgetting, for a moment, the wine going warm on the side table, and the man who had looked at her that afternoon, like 6 years, hadn't happened at all. You can be anything, she said, tucking a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. As long as you're kind about it. Mommy, why don't I have a dad like everyone else? The question came the way children's questions always did, without warning, cutting straight through whatever armor an adult thought they'd built. Seo-yeon kept her voice even. You have me, she said. And that's enough. I know, Soon-hee said, already returning to her drawing, satisfied the way children were satisfied with answers that weren't quite whole answers. I was just wondering. Seo-yeon watched her daughter's pencil move across the page and thought, not for the first time, about the man across town who had no idea a version of his own eyes existed in this apartment, drawing glass buildings past bedtime. The next day, Ji-ho sat in his own office reviewing the terms So-yeon's team had sent overnight. Generous enough to save the Riverside project, precise enough to remind him exactly who held the leverage now. His phone buzzed. Do-yoon, can we get dinner tonight? Need to talk. Ji-ho frowned at the message, unusual for a boy who mostly communicated in one-word answers, and typed back that he'd be home by 7. He arrived at 6:50 to find Do-yoon already at the table, a folder of his own in front of him, college brochures fanned out like evidence. What's this? Ji-ho asked, sitting down. I want to apply to Seo-yeon Holdings scholarship program, Do-yoon said, for the international business track. It's the best one in the country right now. Ji-ho went still. Seo-yeon Holdings. You know them? The company that's funding your Riverside project? Do-yoon watched his father's expression carefully. I did the research myself, before I knew that. It's not because of the deal. I actually want this one. I know, Ji-ho said slowly, though his mind had already gone somewhere else entirely, to a glass office and a woman who ran it. It's a good program. So I can apply? Yes, Ji-ho said. Of course you can. Do-yoon grinned, the tension leaving his shoulders all at once, and for the rest of dinner he talked about essay topics and recommendation letters, while his father nodded along, only half listening, wondering what the odds were that his son's future and his own unfinished past were about to occupy the same building. A few days later, the scholarship applications opened, and across the city, Seo-yeon sat at her desk reviewing the shortlist her admissions team had prepared, names and essays and photographs of hopeful teenagers who had no idea how closely she read every single one. She always did the final review herself. It was one of the few things about the company she refused to delegate. She was 3 names deep when Yoona knocked and set a new folder on her desk. Late submission, ma'am. Strong essay, though. Might be worth a look before the deadline closes. Seo-yeon opened it out of habit, and the name at the top of the page made her hand go still for the second time that week. Baek Do-yoon. She read the essay twice, about ambition and second chances, and a father who worked too hard to explain himself, and something about the boy's voice on the page felt strangely, uncomfortably familiar, though she told herself it was only because his surname kept catching in her throat. Ma'am? Yoona asked. Should I move him to the shortlist? Seo-yeon closed the folder slowly. Give me the day to think about it. That night, she sat by Sun-hee's door, watching her daughter sleep, sketchbook still open on the nightstand beside her, the glass building drawing now shaded in careful pencil strokes. Seo-yeon thought about the boy's essay, about the father he'd written around instead of about, and wondered, with a feeling she didn't have a name for yet, how much of the world was actually this small, and how much of it she had simply stopped being able to avoid. The following week, the scholarship finalists were called in for interviews at the Seo-yeon Holdings Tower, the same glass building Sun-hee had drawn without ever having seen it in person. Do-yoon arrived early, nervous in a way he tried to hide under a stiff new blazer, and sat in the waiting area flipping through his notes one last time. He didn't notice the girl sitting 2 seats down, sketchbook balanced on her knees, until she leaned over and said, "You're shaking the whole bench." Do-yoon looked up, startled. "Sorry. It's fine." She studied him for a second, the way children study people when they haven't yet learned to pretend not to. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "Don't be. My mom runs this place. She's not scary. She just looks scary in meetings." Sun-hee turned her sketchbook toward him, showing off the glass tower drawing. "I come here sometimes after school. I like watching the elevators." Do-yoon smiled despite himself. "That's a good drawing." "I know," she said, entirely without arrogance, simply stating a fact. I'm going to design real buildings one day. Or sing. I haven't decided. Before Do-yoon could answer, a door opened down the hall, and Seo-yeon stepped out, scanning the waiting list in her hand. Her eyes moved down the names once, then stopped. Baek Do-yoon, she read aloud, and looked up to find the boy standing, straightening his blazer, offering the same careful, hopeful smile his father used to wear at that age, before life had taught him to guard it better. For a moment, Seo-yeon simply looked at him, and something in her chest, old and familiar, and entirely unwelcome, turned over slowly, like a door easing open after years of staying shut. "Come in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's talk about your essay." Behind her, Sun-hee watched the boy disappear into her mother's office, already sketching the outline of his face into the corner of her page, not yet knowing why she felt like she should remember it.